Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very, very honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Dr. Harrison. Dr. Tanya Harrison is a planetary scientist and manager of science programs at Planet Labs, working in their federal arm with science agencies to increase research use of Planet Labs' Earth observing satellite data. Previously, she was the director of research at Arizona State University Space Technology and Science Initiative and was on the science team of the Mars Opportunity and Curiosity rovers. Like many of us, at the age of 5 years old, Dr. Harrison watched Big Bird in Japan and became interested in space. In 2017, Harrison joined a flight of scientists to watch the total solar eclipse from an airplane. She's also a professional photographer and has been involved with the Mars Society, National Space Society, and Girl Scouts. As you can see, she is involved in so many activities and programs, but she also is heavily involved in public engagement. Dr. Harrison has spoken of her struggles with harassment in STEM workplace and talks a lot about her work with astronomy. She is so inspirational, and she's a scientist who is actually currently fighting Crohn's disease, but has never gave up on her dreams and passion. Seeing an amazingly strong woman and person like Dr. Harrison and having the opportunity to talk to her is such an honor, a really big honor. So welcome, Dr. Harrison. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to do this interview.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, before we get to understanding more of your journey and how you really got into the space industry, first I'd like to know more about your typical day. I mean, how does it run? I mean, I'm sure it's a little different because of the pandemic, but what do you currently do?
It changes from day to day, but it can vary from meetings with external folks at NASA and other federal civilian science agencies. So places like the US Geological Survey, the National Science Foundation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to learn about all the things that they're working on, where they're either already using planet data or where they could be using planet data. And this is really exciting because I could literally start my morning talking to somebody about walruses in Alaska, and then by lunch, I'm talking about coastal flooding in the Caribbean from hurricanes, and then end the day with discussions of landslides in the Himalayas. So literally anywhere in the world that somebody is doing work, I get to talk to people about all these different subjects, and so it never gets boring.
Wow, yeah, I think that's something that I love about science or STEAM in general is it's always like adaptive and there's so much going on. Especially as a scientist, you're involved in so many things. So that's amazing.
Yeah,
So
it's good to always be learning. It keeps your brain going.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, you have worked on the science team of the Mars Opportunity and Curiosity rovers. So, what was your role, and what are some cool facts and things that you learned, or some things that were unexpected to you before you started working on the projects?
So I was what's called a payload downlink lead, which is a fancy way of saying I looked at the pictures then when they came back to Earth from Mars that we took with the color cameras. And then I would look at them from the standpoint of both engineering, are the cameras functioning properly? Are there any dead pixels? Are the temperature ranges okay? Because you don't want them to be overheating or freezing, stuff like that. But then also looking at them from the standpoint of a geologist, since I'm a geologist. So is there anything cool in this image that tells us something important about the history of Mars? Any place where maybe there's a rock that we want to investigate more, something that we might want to avoid? Should we make any cool special image products, like if we want to get a 3D view of something? Um, that was most of my time working on the rovers. And then like pre-launch, I worked in calibration and testing for the cameras and in landing site selection. So helping to put together the case for which landing sites we would go to.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it actually brought up a really cool point. I mean, I was reading a bunch of like theories where people are like, maybe Mars was like Earth before. I mean, what are your thoughts on that as a, someone who's in the industry?
We definitely know that Mars used to be a lot warmer, a lot wetter. It had a lot thicker of an atmosphere than it does today. And something happened for all of those things to go awry. And so we think we know about when that happened, probably around the same time when Mars's magnetic field shut down, when the core solidified and there wasn't anything left to protect its atmosphere. So slowly the solar wind just stripped away the atmosphere. And along with that, a lot of the water was lost to space or percolated down and is locked up in the soil in the form of ice or minerals. So we know that that transition has happened very slowly over time, and helping us understand that can maybe help us understand what Mars used to be like.
Yeah, the thought is very exciting. I know everyone's really curious about the future. Um, And so now that we've gotten an understanding of what you've done and some cool projects that you've been a part of, my next question for you is you mentioned in your profile, I mean, I was like, when I saw your Twitter profile, I was immediately inspired by your work. And on part of it, you mentioned how you struggled with harassment in the STEM workplace. If you don't mind, could you share your story with all of us?
Sure. Trying to figure out where to start. Basically, I was working at what I thought was my dream job, working on these rovers. It was what I had wanted to do ever since I watched Sojourner land on Mars back in 1997. And I thought that was incredible. I really wanted to be a part of something like that. But I worked in an environment that was extremely hostile, and you never knew on a day-to-day basis how you would be treated by someone that was particularly high up in the company. And so that ended up being extremely stressful to the point where it exploded in a moment that became physically violent. Over time, basically, when I reported it to the company, their reaction, instead of dealing with it, was to try to convince me to quit my job. And I didn't want to do that because I had worked very hard to get where I was. And I didn't think that was right. So I stood up against them and I said, no, I'm not going to leave my job because someone else can't control their temper. And that led to things becoming very difficult because they still didn't want to deal with this person's behavior. So instead, they decided to try to make my life miserable so that I would want to quit. And I stayed at that job for another year after that happened because I didn't want to let them win. But eventually, it became so miserable that my love for doing that job and my desire to be there and keep working on the rovers was no longer worth the way I was being treated. And so I finally decided that it was time to leave.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, did you ever feel like, because you're a woman or like a girl, did you ever feel like you couldn't be a part of the space industry? Or like, did you ever at a point in time, even in your career, feel like, oh, maybe like, or did you ever have the imposter syndrome or, maybe feel lonely or isolated?
Sort of. Ever since I was a kid, I kind of had the attitude of if someone told me that I couldn't do something, my reaction was, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I remember very specifically when I was maybe 8 or so, I was really into baseball. And for some reason, I really wanted to be a baseball umpire. And my dad's reaction was, well, you can't do that because girls can't be umpires. I said, well, then I'll just be the first girl umpire. And he thought that was hilarious. There were a few other similar job things that I aspired to as a kid, and the reaction was, well, you can't be that because girls can't do that. But that never detracted me from it. I just said, well, then I'll just be the first one that does it, or I'll do it anyway. And science was kind of the same thing. I remember a classmate in grade 7 telling me that I couldn't be a scientist because I was a girl. And I told him he was wrong. I knew that there were girls that were scientists. My science teacher that year actually was a woman. And so I definitely encountered that attitude, but I didn't let it stop me. And all the way through college, even I had classes in my physics major when I got to the higher level courses where I was the only woman in the entire class. But it never really bothered me very much because I just kind of expected it.
Yeah, yeah, that's understandable. Did you have like, because you're a really strong personality. I feel like a lot of girls, don't think the same way you do, which everyone should, honestly. Did you have a role model or someone you looked up to that gave you that confidence, or was it more of like a natural, characteristic for you?
That's a good question. There's nobody that comes to mind in particular as like a headstrong person that I looked up to. Like I don't think either of my parents or my grandparents that I hung around really had that kind of personality. I guess I was just indignant on my own.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I feel like every girl out there should have that and like not like fall in, not even just girls in general, but like other factors as well. They shouldn't like demotivate themselves based off like, how they're born because that's something that they can't control. And so I definitely and thank you for sharing that. I feel like everyone needs to acknowledge what's happening and move past from it. And I'm also curious from the work time that because you've probably been part of the industry for a few years, do you think that there has been growth and development in a STEM workplace where, there's more diversity and inclusivity? Or do you think that we're trying to say we're doing anything, but no change is really happening? What's your take on the future and what's happening right now?
I've definitely seen a change in, I guess I've been part of the industry and going to conferences and things like that since about 2007. And the diversity in the population that you see of people in the audience is changing. There's a huge dichotomy, especially in space, between, I would say, folks that were around in kind of the Apollo era and like earlier space flight days, which tend to be old white men, and then the younger generation, where you have folks that grew up during the space shuttle, and then throughout the 90s and the 2000s, where we've had a ton of space exploration, because we had a big lull there for a little while in like the sort of 70s into the 80s post Apollo. There's a noticeable age gap, at least in the planetary science exploration side of things, when you look at the folks that are at these conferences. But if you look at the younger generation, there's way more women, there's way more people of color. So you can see that there's this wave coming in of like the next group of people. And they all seem very aware of how we want to make this a better environment for everyone. We don't want it to be like it was, even just 5-10 years ago. And that awareness is really helpful because we're having conversations that weren't being held before. But it's still a slow process. There's still rampant harassment in the field. It's driven away multiple people that I know personally, which is heartbreaking because these are incredibly talented, passionate people that want to be here. And they've just been made so miserable by the environment that they are either considering leaving or they have already left.
Yeah, I definitely think that I can see incremental changes and there's been more action that's happening. So definitely I appreciate that. And I know the future, like the younger generations that are getting into the space industry now are, very diverse and there's like a full circle of different people. So it's really nice to see. And of course, like you're mentioning, there's always room for improvement wherever it is. So I definitely can agree with that. And so, what is your advice for minorities in pursuing a career in the STEM field or specifically in the space field from your past experiences?
I would say, I mean, taking a page from young Tanya forward, like if people tell you that you can't do something, don't listen to that. Or if they tell you it's going to be difficult, the pathway to get to where you want to go is not always going to be easy, and it might not even be straightforward. But if you can keep your eyes on your long-term goal, then figuring out the way to kind of maneuver along to get there gets a little bit easier. And if you hit some kind of roadblock, try not to get discouraged, because that's not necessarily the end of the road. You just have to find the detour. And that has always been really helpful to me, at least, to keep my mind on that long-term goal, so that anything in the middle just felt like, okay, I'll figure out how to deal with this and then move on to continue toward that end goalpost.
Yeah, it's just like remembering it's part of the process and like never to just give up in the middle of something because of a certain obstacle. I mean, you've moved on from the harassment that took place, and you chose to take it in a positive way and to make positive change by taking your experiences and sharing it with others, which all of us should do. And so another question of mine, like like I was saying before, I was reading your Twitter profile and I was like literally so inspired with the work that you've been doing. And I also noticed you support the disabled STEM community, and you were saying how you have had Crohn's disease, but you're still so inspirational and motivating your work. It has never like stopped you from doing anything. And so I'm curious, have you ever felt demotivated because of the situation you were put in? Or has that become a factor of motivation for you?
There's certainly been times that it was hard to stay motivated, and times where I felt like I wouldn't be able to accomplish the goals that I had for myself because of being sick. Certainly in college, that was a huge problem, because I would spend weeks at a time in the hospital, and it caused a lot of issues with trying to complete coursework. For example, my undergraduate transcript is littered with what my university called hardship withdrawals. Anytime I was in the hospital for more than a week, I would have to drop out of a bunch of classes and take them over again. And it started to feel like I was never going to make it through, like first year calculus in particular. That was very difficult to complete when you're sick all the time. But I think it also ended up being motivating because I've always loved space so much. It was that thing that was almost like escapism, the thing that kept you happy when everything else was miserable. And so, again, with that focusing on the end goal, everything else in the middle is like, okay, well, I can deal with this because I want to reach this thing so badly. I will figure out how to deal with all of the other stuff that's being thrown at my way to get to that point. And so I think for anybody that's dealing with any kind of hardship like that, whether it be uh, any kind of illness or something, similar, like having that thing that you love, whether it's space or sports or I don't know, horse riding, whatever it is, the thing that drives you, like use that as your motivation to just keep going.
Yeah, I think being able to find that passion, being able to explore different opportunities and different, clubs and trying to see what is something that you love is really important so that, no matter how much difficulty you have, you always try to achieve your end goal because you're so passionate and you love what you're doing. And it's not a struggle to wake up every Monday morning, it's more exciting and you look forward to it. So I definitely agree with that. And I'm curious, how did you get into space? Like, where did your passion and love for space really ignite apart from the amazing, childhood experiences you've had? I mean, was there like a specific club or an activity that you did that really was like, I'm going to do this for my future career? Or, just like a moment like that?
Yeah, I think the specific moment, other than all the things that made me generally interested in space, when I was 14, yeah, 14, there was this program that NASA had called the Mars Millennium Project, where they challenged students to design a base on Mars in the year 2030. And I thought that this was really cool. I worked on the project by myself because I didn't have any friends that were like STEM nerdy enough to want to do it with me. Um, and I ended up reaching out to my local chapter of a group called the Mars Society in Seattle. And they liked how excited I was. So they raised money to pay for me to go to Toronto to present the work that I had done for the project to the other members of the society, like an international conference. And I got up there and I was so nervous because I was so young in front of a room full of, I think, entirely adults. And I read it off of notebook paper. And this was like pre PowerPoint. So I had overhead transparencies that I had drawn by hand of all of my plans. And I just sat there reading nervously and showing my things. But at the end of it, I was so pumped at how excited the audience was and the kind of questions that they gave that I knew I really wanted to do research and I wanted to be a person that presented things at conferences like that. And so eventually, fast forward uh, 20 years, that doesn't sound right, some amount of years. And, I ended up giving a TEDx talk, with no script or anything like that. And I wish I had told people in that talk, because like I started this reading off of notebook paper and now I do this, all the time. I never would have thought that I would have gotten to that point.
Wow, that's amazing that, there's certain moments where you just know that this is what you're going to do in the future. And I'm glad, you were able to grow and improve as a person and, better create like a better version of yourself and do what you love. I always think there's that camp or there's that activity that you do that really ignites things. I mean, I know that the NASA Sisters program that I went to in seventh grade really just like pushed, like I knew that at that moment I was going to do something for NASA when I grow up because that camp was amazing. So I think being able to provide those opportunities and experiences to children across the world would really allow them to, find their true love for whatever it is. And so I think that's what many people and many organizations are working towards. And I'm so glad there's amazing people like you, always inspiring students to explore and to follow their passions. So, did you have when you were trying to like you knew at that stage you really wanted to go into space, and throughout high school and college, did you ever have some twists and turns in your journey, or did you feel how did you have obstacles, or was there something that kind of made you deter your path ever?
There was, yeah. I did a program where I skipped part of high school and just went straight to college.
Oh, wow.
And in some respects, that was really great because I got to take the classes that I wanted to take. But in the process, I skipped some pretty foundational math classes. And so when I got to university, I wasn't doing very well in my physics classes because I hadn't taken some of the calculus that I needed to do well in them. And I got really discouraged with that because I was one of the students that had performed really well, like in terms of my grades through junior high. And suddenly being in these classes where I was essentially failing was really hard for me to process. And I decided, well, maybe this isn't actually for me. Maybe I'm not really smart enough to do this after all. So I switched schools entirely and I changed my major to digital media production because I decided I was going to make like Pixar movies, 3D movies. But that only lasted for 1 quarter because I missed space so much and I felt like I wasn't using my brain enough doing the animations. So I switched back to a different school, changed my major back to physics, and I still did very poorly in my math classes. So that's that's another piece of advice for all of the students. You know, you do not have to be a genius in math to work for NASA or to work on missions like this. Throughout the rest of college, I never did well in my calculus classes, but I have also never used calculus a day in my life since college, at least in the fields that I'm in. So don't lose hope if you're not good at calculus.
I know. I mean, like, the purpose really of these interviews is to show not only diverse space champions and to highlight the amazing work you're doing and like provide information for the students who are watching, but also like break these stereotypes. I feel like the space industry is one of the most heavily stereotyped fields I have ever seen. I feel like there's so much, whether it be in terms of the people that can work or also just the careers that are there and the knowledge level. I feel like everyone compares space to rocket science. I mean, it is technically rocket science, but the term itself is, taken as super complicated, and you have to be like Albert Einstein smart. Your IQ has to be like way above average, and I feel like there's always this low confidence level for young children. They never view space as a real career because they think they just can't, be smart enough, or they're not naturally a genius to be a part of it. And so, I'm glad you said that, because you don't have to be good at everything. I think that as long as you have that passion and hard work and you're willing to put in the time and effort to just continue with what you're doing, it's more important than anything.
It's really about being smart in a specific thing. So, I know a lot about Mars, but I don't know anything about how to build a rocket. I wouldn't even know where to start. I don't know very much about engineering beyond the stuff that is very specific to the projects I've worked on, like camera systems for satellites or rovers. But if you asked me something about the propulsion systems on them, that's totally outside my area of expertise. So I like to liken it to, say, somebody that has spent a lot of years of their life learning how to work on a particular kind of car, or do a particular type of painting. Like they've honed their craft in that one specific thing. It's not really any different for space. We've just devoted ourselves to something extremely specific that sounds highly technical, and it is. Rocket science is certainly not simple, and for that you probably do need to be good at calculus. But you don't have to be a genius in everything. There's certainly many things that I do not know a lot about.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. There is the top level science, of course, but there's also other jobs, other careers that, they're there if you're really interested in pursuing a career in space. It shouldn't completely just be blocked off. And so, I was there ever a mentorship opportunity or volunteer role or something that really propelled you into the space industry, maybe coming out of college, and, really just helped you find your correct job and path?
Um, Coming out of college, I guess it was sort of a chance encounter. At the end of my master's program, I wasn't sure what I should do. I didn't enjoy grad school all that much, so I wasn't sure I wanted to continue on for a PhD. But as a scientist, I didn't know what other job options were out there. And at the time, the new space industry didn't really exist yet. So it was very difficult to find a job. I ended up mass emailing a bunch of Mars researchers, seeing if any of them that had written papers that I had read for my thesis maybe needed somebody to process data for them, because I had been hired for jobs like that before. And one of them suggested looking at this company that built cameras for space missions. I never would have thought to look there on my own because I would have assumed they were all engineers. So what would I do there? I can't build a camera. But I took a look at their website, and they were hiring for somebody where they wanted a geology degree, a master's degree in geology, to work on choosing what those cameras would take pictures of. And so just that serendipitous moment of sort of right person, right place, right time all came together. And I learned from that I didn't just want to work on the science, like looking at the data from the missions, but I liked being intimately involved in the missions themselves, like talking to the robots, writing the code, seeing the images when they came back, picking what I got to take pictures of. And that's not something that very many people get the chance to do, even if they are scientists working on Mars. They're just interacting with the data that this handful of people have worked so hard to get back to Earth to hand to them. And so I got to be in that little tiny pocket of people, and I feel very lucky to have had that experience.
Yeah, that I'm so glad you were able to really, hone in on this is what you wanted to do and you had that opportunity. It just worked out perfectly. And so that they always say if you just like keep trying, you're gonna find a position that just calls for you. I know like personally as a high school student, I'm continuously like applying for so many things. And if I apply for 10 things, you never know if even one of them works out or one person can lead me to another program. It's like really great because that allows me to, be able to explore new things and reach out. So I definitely agree with what you were doing. And so I'm also really curious throughout your industry, you've seen so many changes and you're probably very excited about the future of space. And so I'm curious to learn what excites you and what concerns you about the future of the space industry.
Ooh, I'm excited at how quickly everything on the industry side is moving. I don't think we could have predicted 10 years ago where we would be today in terms of, SpaceX is launching things every single week and landing boosters when they were barely able to do anything 10 years ago. We have all of these like private companies building different kinds of satellites to help us understand the Earth as a whole. We're trying to do 3D printing in space. We've got private companies now designing things to go to the moon. So I can't wait to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years because I'm not sure we can fully predict that. In terms of things that worry me, that's hard. I think the big worry that I have is as we think about sending humans to these places, we want to be very intentional about how we do that because as humans have expanded across the earth, we haven't been the most responsible as we've done that, and we've done a lot of horrible things along the way. And so now as we decide to send humans to other planets, we can be very conscious about the decisions that we make so that we make sure we do it right this time.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I have had a few people who said the exact same thing that you were saying. Definitely the excitement of the future is that it's so unpredictable. I mean, maybe in 10 years we'll, be able to discover other cool things that we think is impossible right now and get so much more cool technology, space technology, and, improve life here on Earth as well as improve our exploration out in space. I think it's very exciting to think of all the possibilities that we could discover, as well as the nervousness of being precautionary of every step we take, making sure not to, misuse what we have and, the beauty of space. Of course, we don't want to ruin that. And I think those are definitely some things to take into consideration. And so, my last question for you, now that we've learned your journey, how you grew as a person from a young child and to an amazing, strong woman, as well as your excitements in the space industry, you probably have learned some very important, valuable life lessons. So, what advice do you have for young people regarding their pursuit of a passion in the STEM field, space industry, or really any job in general? Something that you wish you knew when you were in high school or in college?
I think the biggest piece of advice I have is to be proactive. The opportunities that you're looking for generally won't just fall in your lap. So you need to go out and seek them out. You mentioned applying for, 10 opportunities in the hopes of getting one. You probably had to go look for all 10 of those things. And if you don't apply for them, you'll never get selected, right? So you might as well apply. And the worst that will happen is someone will say no. So don't get scared about applying to things you don't think you're qualified for. Don't worry if you think that it's not going to be a good fit because you never know what's going to come from those opportunities. And the best part is if you chase them and you keep doing that, the fact that you are proactive makes you stand out from the crowd because there are a ton of people that don't take that initiative. They don't have that energy. And so they don't really rise to the top when people are looking around saying, oh, who should I have to work on this thing? Or who do I know that's really passionate about X? Like you want them to think of you when that comes to mind. And so the more you put yourself out there, the more likely it is that you'll be that person that they think of.
That is amazing advice. When I was a little kid, so in third grade, I was always interested in basketball. And so finally, my parents put me in a league. And when I went there, I would just, be scared to shoot the basketball. I would be because I thought I would miss the basket, even though, I've been playing in my like house all the time. I was scared at the actual game. And so a few games later, because my parents could see the pattern, they said this quote that really stuck with me, which is, I think, related to what you were saying, which is you miss the 100% of the shots you don't take. And so, literally, if I don't even try and I immediately give up without even trying, then I'm not going to get it anyway. So, if I'm trying, at least I know I tried and I didn't get it because the outcome is either going to be the same or you're going to get a good result. So, you might as well just shoot that basket or try that opportunity and always be proactive. So, I think that is amazing advice, Dr. Harrison. So, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to conduct this wonderful interview. I learned so much and I'm truly so inspired to see such an amazing woman, and there's so many in the space industry, and you're truly one of them. And I want to thank you for your time to share your story with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.